She ordered her father-in-law to cook Thanksgiving for 25 guests without ever asking him. But while everyone waited for the feast, Patrick Varner was already on a one-way flight hundreds of miles away. What happened next exposed a lie that destroyed far more than a holiday dinner. If you enjoy emotional family dramas with shocking twists and satisfying karma, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. The phone rang on a quiet Monday morning, just as I finished pouring myself a second cup of coffee. Outside my kitchen window, the lake reflected a pale November sky, and the trees had already surrendered most of their leaves. Retirement had taught me to appreciate mornings like this. No deadlines. No meetings. No one demanding anything from me. At 67 years old, I believed I had finally earned that kind of peace. My name is Patrick Varner. For 41 years, I worked as a commercial architect, designing schools, libraries, and civic buildings across New England. My career had been demanding, but it gave me purpose. When I retired, I promised myself I would never again allow work to consume every holiday and every weekend. Then life changed in a different way. My wife, Eleanor, passed away 6 years ago after a long illness. Since then, I had learned to live alone in the small Vermont house we bought together decades earlier. It wasn't a lonely life. I had good neighbors, familiar routines, and memories that still filled every room. Most importantly, I had my son, Nolan. Even though he no longer lived nearby, I believed family remained family no matter how much distance separated us. As Thanksgiving approached, I found myself thinking about the traditions Eleanor and I had built together. Every November, we cooked side by side from sunrise until the first guests arrived. She prepared pies while I handled the turkey. We laughed whenever something burned, and somehow dinner always came together perfectly. After she was gone, I continued hosting smaller Thanksgiving dinners because it felt like the closest thing to keeping her spirit alive. The guest list became shorter over the years, but the meaning never changed. Everything shifted after Nolan married Lysandra Quill. At first, I wanted to like her. She was energetic, confident, and always spoke about exciting opportunities. She had built a successful lifestyle brand online, attracting hundreds of thousands of followers who admired her decorating ideas, recipes, and holiday celebrations. I respected anyone willing to work hard for success. But the longer I knew her, the more I noticed that almost every conversation revolved around appearances. Meals had to look perfect before anyone was allowed to eat. Family gatherings became carefully staged photographs. Birthdays weren't celebrations anymore. They were content for social media. Sometimes we spent more time arranging decorations than actually talking to one another. Over the past 2 years, I watched my son slowly adapt to her world. Nolan used to laugh easily and ignore small inconveniences. Now he constantly checked camera angles, lighting, and audience reactions whenever Lysandra posted something online. I told myself it was simply a different generation. Perhaps I didn't understand modern careers. Still, something about it always made me uncomfortable. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, Nolan called to ask whether I planned a visit for the holiday. I haven't decided yet, I answered honestly. I was thinking about keeping things quiet this year. He hesitated before replying. Lysandra has been planning something special. That sentence lingered in my mind after we ended the conversation. Knowing her, something special usually meant something expensive, elaborate, or impossible to organize without exhausting everyone involved. A week later, my phone rang again. This time it was Lysandra herself. Her cheerful voice immediately sounded rehearsed. "Patrick, I hope you're having a wonderful morning." "I am," I replied. "What can I do for you?" "Oh, that's exactly why I'm calling." There was a brief pause before she continued speaking with complete confidence. "I've finalized Thanksgiving plans." I smiled politely, even though she couldn't see me. "That's nice. We're expecting 25 guests this year. That's quite a crowd." "It will be incredible," she said enthusiastically. "Several important people are coming." I assumed she meant friends or relatives. Instead, she continued, "I'll need you to handle all the cooking." For several seconds, I genuinely believed I had misunderstood her. "I'm sorry," I said carefully. "What did you mean?" "You'll prepare the entire Thanksgiving dinner. Turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, vegetables, desserts, appetizers, everything from scratch. Everyone has heard about your cooking." I leaned back in my chair. I don't remember agreeing to that. She laughed as though I'd made a joke. "Oh, you don't need to worry. I already told everyone you're excited." The smile disappeared from my face. "You already told everyone?" "Of course. I wasn't asked." You didn't need to be. Family helps family. Her words landed with surprising force. They weren't a request. They weren't even a discussion. Somewhere along the way, someone had decided my holiday belonged to them. I set my coffee mug on the table before my hand tightened around it. Lysandra, I said calmly, I think you've made a mistake. Her tone changed instantly. No, Patrick. Everything is already arranged. At that moment, I had no idea that this phone call was only the beginning of a much larger problem, one that would force me to choose between protecting family harmony and protecting my own dignity. I remained seated at my kitchen table long after the call ended. The coffee had gone cold, yet I never took another sip. During my career, I had negotiated multi-million-dollar construction contracts, resolved disputes between contractors, and handled impossible deadlines without losing my composure. Yet somehow, a 5-minute phone conversation with my own daughter-in-law had left me more unsettled than any business meeting ever had. The more I replayed her words, the more one sentence refused to leave my mind. You didn't need to be asked. Family helps family. Helping family had never been a problem for me. Being volunteered without my knowledge was something entirely different. I decided not to react emotionally. Experience had taught me that assumptions often created bigger problems than facts. There had to be some misunderstanding. Perhaps Nolan didn't know how she had presented everything. Maybe he believed I had already agreed. Rather than argue over the phone, I chose to drive to their house the following afternoon. The trip took nearly 2 hours through winding Vermont roads lined with bare maple trees. Gray clouds covered the sky, and a light wind pushed fallen leaves across the pavement. Normally I enjoyed the drive, but this time every mile gave me another opportunity to wonder whether I had somehow become the unreasonable one. Was I overreacting? Had retirement simply made me too protective of my free time? I genuinely questioned myself before arriving. Their neighborhood looked exactly as I remembered. New homes, perfectly trimmed lawns, and expensive SUVs parked in nearly every driveway. When I pulled into Nolan's driveway, I noticed delivery trucks parked outside the house. Several large boxes labeled Holiday Collection were stacked near the garage. Workers carried decorative furniture inside while another unloaded expensive lighting equipment. That seemed excessive for a family dinner. I walked toward the front door but stopped when I heard voices coming from the partially open living room window. Lysandra was speaking. Her tone sounded completely different from the one she used with family. It was polished, confident, almost theatrical. Everyone keeps asking how we create such authentic family holidays, she said enthusiastically. I glanced through the window without making a sound. A professional camera stood in the middle of the room. Bright studio lights illuminated every corner, while a young man adjusted a microphone attached to Lysandra's sweater. She smiled directly into the camera. This Thanksgiving is especially meaningful because my father-in-law insists on cooking everything himself. It's been his family tradition for years, and we would never take that joy away from him. I felt my stomach tighten. That wasn't just an exaggeration. It was a complete fabrication. She continued speaking as if she genuinely believed every word. Our guests always say his recipes remind them of old-fashioned American holidays. That's exactly the atmosphere we're creating again this year. The cameraman nodded with approval. Perfect, he said. Let's do one more take. I quietly stepped away from the window before anyone noticed me. My first instinct was to confront her immediately, but curiosity kept me silent. I walked around the side of the house instead, pretending to admire the landscaping while the recording continued inside. A few minutes later, another delivery truck arrived. 2 workers unloaded boxes carrying the logos of premium cookware companies I recognized from television advertisements. One employee asked where the promotional display should be placed. Promotional display? The phrase immediately caught my attention. Another worker replied, everything goes into the dining room. The sponsors want maximum visibility. Sponsors? I frowned. Since when did Thanksgiving have sponsors? As I returned to my car, I noticed a printed schedule lying on top of one unopened box near the garage entrance. It had apparently slipped loose during unloading. I could only read the top section before a worker picked it up. The heading read, Thanksgiving Production Timeline. Production? Not dinner. Not celebration. Production. I drove home with more questions than answers. That evening, I sat in my study with my laptop and searched for Lysandra's public business accounts. I had never paid much attention to her online career before, but within minutes I discovered something that made everything begin to fit together. She had announced an exclusive Thanksgiving event nearly 3 weeks earlier. Her promotional video promised an authentic family gathering featuring Patrick Varner's famous homemade Thanksgiving feast. My name appeared repeatedly throughout the advertisements. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Hundreds of people had already commented about how excited they were to see my recipes. The comments became stranger the farther I scrolled. Some viewers thanked sponsoring companies for supporting the event. Others discussed special discount codes that would become available during the holiday livestream. There were brand partnerships, paid advertisements, corporate giveaways, luxury kitchen products, holiday decorations, even premium grocery suppliers. This wasn't simply a family dinner. It was a carefully planned commercial production designed to generate revenue. The realization hit me with uncomfortable clarity. Lysandra hadn't volunteered me because she wanted my help. She had built an entire business event around my reputation without asking for permission first. And unless I stopped it somehow, 25 invited guests and thousands of online viewers would arrive expecting me to perform a role I had never agreed to accept. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured my name appearing in advertisements I had never approved. It wasn't just embarrassing. It felt deeply personal. My late wife and I had spent years building our family traditions around sincerity, not publicity. Now those memories were being repackaged as marketing material, without so much as a conversation. The next morning, I made a decision. Before confronting Lysandra again, I needed to hear one person tell me the truth. My son. If Nolan knew nothing about this, we could solve the situation together. If he did know, then I deserved to hear it directly from him. I called and asked if we could meet for lunch. He agreed almost immediately. We met at a small family-owned diner halfway between our homes, a place we used to visit when he was in high school after basketball practice. The restaurant hadn't changed much over the years. The same wooden booths. The same framed photographs of local farms hanging on the walls. Even the waitress recognized us and smiled as she poured coffee into our mugs. For a brief moment, everything felt normal again. Then I slid my phone across the table. I need you to look at something. Nolan picked it up and quietly scrolled through screenshots of Lysandra's promotional posts. He didn't appear surprised. He didn't ask where I found them. He simply stared at the screen in silence. Finally, I asked the question that had been sitting in my mind since yesterday. Did you know about all of this? He rubbed the back of his neck before answering. Yeah, just one word. Quiet. Almost ashamed. My chest tightened. So you've known that she's been telling everyone I'm cooking Thanksgiving? He nodded without looking at me. I thought she talked to you first. But she didn't. I know. I leaned back in my chair. And you never thought to call me? He remained silent. The waitress arrived with our meals, completely unaware that the conversation at our table had become heavier than either of us expected. We thanked her politely and waited until she walked away. Nolan, I said carefully, I need you to explain what's happening. He sighed. It's bigger than Thanksgiving. What does that mean? Lysandra signed partnership agreements weeks ago. I frowned. What kind of agreements? Advertising contracts. I already suspected as much, but hearing my own son confirm it made the situation feel even worse. How many? I'm not sure. Ballpark. He hesitated. I think, maybe 8. I stared at him. 8 companies? He slowly nodded. They're paying for product placement, promotional videos, and live stream segments. And every one of those companies believes I'm participating? Another long silence. Yes. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. So my name became part of business contracts without anyone asking me? I tried telling her she should ask first. But she said you'd never refuse family. That sentence sounded painfully familiar. I folded my hands together, trying to remain calm. And what happens if I don't show up? Nolan finally looked directly into my eyes. The sponsors will probably demand refunds. From who? From her. And she could lose future partnerships. There it was. The real concern. Not Thanksgiving. Not family. Money. I pushed my untouched plate away. So you're asking me to spend several days shopping, cooking, cleaning, serving 25 guests, and smiling on camera. So her business doesn't suffer. His shoulders dropped. When you put it like that, how else should I put it? He didn't answer. Instead, he quietly admitted something that hurt even more. She already spent part of the sponsorship money. I blinked. Spent it on what? The house renovations. New furniture. Equipment. Decorations. So the money is already gone. He nodded. If the event fails, she can't pay everyone back. Again, silence. For years, I had taught Nolan that responsibility meant accepting the consequences of your own decisions. Somewhere along the way, that lesson had been replaced by hoping someone else would absorb the cost of a mistake. I love you, I finally said. I know, but I won't become someone's unpaid employee because they made promises they had no right to make. His expression fell. I was hoping you helped just this once. I slowly stood and reached for my wallet. I've already helped this family plenty of times. I paid the bill before he could object. Outside the diner, cold wind swept across the nearly empty parking lot. Nolan followed me to my truck. Dad. I turned. I don't know how to fix this. I looked at my son for several long seconds. Neither of us raised our voices. Neither of us argued. Instead, I realized something far more painful than any shouting match. He wasn't asking me because it was right. He was asking because it was easier than confronting the person who had created the problem. I placed my hand on his shoulder. I hope someday you remember that protecting someone from consequences isn't the same as protecting them. Then I climbed into my truck and drove away. By the time I reached home that afternoon, my disappointment had transformed into something much quieter. Clarity. For the first time since Lysandra's phone call, I knew exactly what I was going to do. And it did not involve cooking Thanksgiving dinner. The moment I walked back into my house, I stopped thinking about how to convince anyone that I was right. That battle was already over in my mind. I had explained my position. I had listened to my son's side. I had discovered exactly how far Lysandra had gone without my permission. There was nothing left to debate. The only question now was what I intended to do next. I spent the evening sitting in my living room with an old photo album resting on my lap. Most of the pictures were from the years Eleanor and I raised Nolan. There were camping trips, birthdays, Christmas mornings, and countless Thanksgivings around the dining table we had built together. Every photograph reminded me the holidays were never about perfect centerpieces or impressive menus. They were about people choosing to spend time together because they wanted to, not because someone had turned affection into an obligation. One photograph held my attention longer than the others. It showed Eleanor standing on a rocky shoreline, smiling into the wind during a vacation in Maine almost 20 years earlier. I remember that trip perfectly. One evening, while watching fishing boats return to the harbor, she pointed toward the northeast horizon. Someday, she had said, when we're both retired, let's keep driving until we reach Nova Scotia. I've always wanted to see those little coastal villages. We never made that trip. Work kept getting in the way. Then her illness arrived. By the time I retired, traveling no longer seemed possible for us. I gently closed the album. For years, I had postponed that dream because life always seemed to demand something else first. Maybe it was time to stop postponing. The next morning, I opened my laptop instead of searching for Thanksgiving recipes. I searched airline schedules. There was a direct flight leaving Burlington 2 days before Thanksgiving. Destination: Halifax, Nova Scotia. One-way ticket. I stared at the screen for several minutes. Most people probably would have booked a round-trip flight without thinking twice. I didn't. Not because I planned to disappear forever. Because I honestly had no idea how long I wanted to stay away. For the first time in years, I wanted to make a decision based entirely on what I needed instead of what everyone else expected from me. I clicked the purchase button. A confirmation email appeared seconds later. Just like that, my Thanksgiving plans completely changed. Over the following days, I packed slowly. One suitcase, a warm winter coat, several sweaters, my camera, a journal I hadn't written in since Eleanor passed away. I deliberately left my cookbook sitting on the kitchen counter. It suddenly felt symbolic. On Tuesday afternoon, my neighbor, Mrs. Hargrove, noticed my suitcase as I loaded it into the hallway. "Going somewhere for the holiday?" she asked with a cheerful smile. "I am. Visiting family?" I smiled politely. "No, visiting a promise." She looked slightly confused but didn't press further. "I hope you have a wonderful trip." "I think I finally will." That evening my phone buzzed repeatedly. Messages from Lysandra. Shopping lists. Cooking schedules. Delivery confirmations. Guest arrival times. Not one message asked whether I was still willing to participate. Every message assumed complete obedience. I never replied. The following morning brought even more notifications. One message simply read, "Don't forget to pick up the turkey Thursday morning." Another, "Sponsors will arrive before noon." Another, "Please wear neutral-colored clothing because bright patterns don't look good on camera." I stared at the screen in disbelief. She was giving wardrobe instructions now. Without anger, I switched my phone to silent mode and placed it inside a drawer. The quiet that followed felt surprisingly comforting. Before leaving for the airport, I walked through every room of my house one last time. I checked the windows, adjusted the thermostat, watered the plants, and locked the back door. Everything looked exactly as I wanted to remember it. Peaceful, organized, untouched by unnecessary drama. There was only one task left. I sat at the dining table and pulled out a plain white envelope. Inside, I placed a single handwritten note addressed to Nolan. It read, "Son, family should never volunteer another family member without permission. Love cannot be measured by how much labor someone can provide. I hope one day you understand why I had to make this decision. Love, Dad." I didn't mention Lysandra. I didn't criticize anyone. There was nothing left to argue about. The note wasn't written to make anyone feel guilty. It was written so my son would someday know that I left because I respected myself, not because I stopped loving him. An hour later, I locked the front door, placed the house key into my coat pocket, and climbed into my truck. As I drove toward Burlington International Airport, the autumn landscape rolled past my windows in shades of brown, gold, and deep red. The farther I traveled, the lighter I felt. By the time I parked near the terminal and collected my suitcase, I realized something unexpected. For the first time since Eleanor died, I wasn't running away from grief. I was finally walking toward a life that belonged to me again. The airplane lifted off just after sunrise, and as Vermont disappeared beneath a blanket of clouds, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Relief. Not excitement. Not revenge. Simply relief. My phone remained switched off inside my carry-on bag, and for the first time in days, nobody expected anything from me. I looked out the window as the landscape slowly vanished, reminding myself that I had every right to choose peace over obligation. After landing in Halifax, I rented a small car and began driving along the southern coastline toward a quiet fishing village I had read about years earlier. The roads curved beside the Atlantic Ocean, passing weathered lighthouses, colorful wooden homes, and small harbors filled with fishing boats. It was colder than Vermont, but the air carried a freshness that immediately calmed my mind. By late afternoon, I checked into a family-owned and overlooking the water. The owner, an elderly woman named Moira, greeted me with genuine warmth. "Traveling for the holiday?" she asked while handing me the room key. "I am. Meeting family?" I smiled gently. "In a way, I'm meeting an old promise." She nodded without asking another question. Some people understood that not every answer needed an explanation. My room was simple but comfortable. A wooden chair sat beside a large window facing the harbor. Fishing boats rocked gently with the tide while seabirds circled overhead. I unpacked slowly, placed Eleanor's old photograph on the bedside table, and stood quietly for several minutes. "We finally made it," I whispered. That evening, I walked along the waterfront before finding a small seafood restaurant where local families had gathered for dinner. No cameras. No decorations carefully arranged for social media. No staged conversations. People laughed naturally, children talked too loudly, and nobody cared whether every plate looked perfect before taking the first bite. It reminded me of Thanksgivings long before phones had become part of every meal. The next morning was Thanksgiving Day. Back in Vermont, preparations for Lysandra's event would already be underway. I resisted the temptation to switch my phone back on. Instead, I ordered breakfast at the inn and spent several hours exploring nearby trails overlooking the ocean. Every step seemed to remove another layer of tension I had been carrying since that first phone call. Around noon, I returned to my room to rest. Curiosity finally won. I powered on my phone. The screen immediately exploded with notifications. Dozens of missed calls. More than 50 text messages. Voicemails. Emails. Most came from Nolan. Several came from unfamiliar numbers. Others came from Lysandra. The earliest message had arrived shortly after 8 o'clock that morning. "Patrick, where are you?" Another followed 15 minutes later. "Guests are asking when you'll arrive." Then another. "The turkey hasn't been picked up. Please answer your phone." The messages became increasingly frantic. "Call me immediately. The sponsors are here. People are waiting. This isn't funny." Then came one from Nolan. "Dad, please, just tell me you're okay." I called him immediately. He answered before the first ring had completely finished. "Dad, I'm fine." There was a long pause filled only by his breathing. "Where are you?" "Nova Scotia." Silence. Finally he said, "You actually left." "I did." Another pause. "You booked a trip?" "A one-way ticket." He exhaled slowly. You have no idea what's happening here. I can imagine. No, I don't think you can. He sounded exhausted. The guests started arriving before noon. The production crew has been setting up cameras since early morning. Every sponsor expected you to begin cooking on livestream. What happened when they realized I wasn't there? Lysandra told everyone you were delayed. And then? An hour passed. He stopped speaking. And then? I repeated. People started asking questions. I listened quietly. She tried calling you over and over. She even sent someone to your house. My house is locked. I know. What happened next? The catering backup plan failed. There was a backup? There was supposed to be. He laughed bitterly. She assumed she'd never need it. I closed my eyes. So there wasn't any food. Not enough. 25 guests. And a production crew. What about the sponsors? They kept waiting because they thought you'd still arrive. Outside my hotel window, waves rolled gently against the shoreline. Inside the phone, I could hear voices shouting somewhere behind Nolan. It sounds busy. You have no idea. Before I could ask another question, he lowered his voice. Dad, there's something else. What is it? Lysandra just started telling everyone that you promised to come but changed your mind at the last minute. I frowned. That's not true. I know. But she's saying it anyway. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Nolan quietly admitted something that surprised me. I think everything is falling apart. I looked back toward the calm Atlantic Ocean stretching endlessly beyond the harbor. For the first time that day, I realized Thanksgiving dinner wasn't the only thing about to collapse. The carefully constructed image Lysandra had spent years building was beginning to crack, and once people started asking the right questions, there would be no simple way to put it back together. I ended the call with Nolan, and placed my phone on the small wooden desk beside the window. For a few minutes, I simply watched the waves rolling toward the rocky shoreline. Seagulls drifted above the harbor while fishing boats returned one by one. Everything outside remained calm, yet hundreds of miles away, chaos was unfolding because someone had built an entire event on assumptions instead of honesty. Part of me wondered if I should have felt guilty. I didn't. I had never agreed to cook. I had never signed a contract. I had never accepted responsibility for promises someone else had made. The consequences belonged to the person who created the situation. Late that afternoon, I walked down to the harbor cafe for a bowl of seafood chowder. The place was busy with local families celebrating Thanksgiving in their own quiet way. As I finished my meal, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Nolan. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number from Vermont. I answered cautiously. Patrick Varner speaking. Mr. Varner? My name is Daniel Mercer. I represent Hearthstone Culinary Supply. The company name sounded familiar. I remembered seeing its logo on one of the promotional boxes outside Nolan's house. What can I do for you, Mr. Mercer? His voice remained professional, but I could hear frustration underneath. I apologize for contacting you directly during holiday, but we're trying to clarify several issues regarding today's promotional event. What kind of issues? There appears to be some confusion concerning your participation. There isn't any confusion on my side. A brief silence followed. I see. I was never participating. Another pause. Would you mind explaining that? I took a slow breath and told him everything. I described the unexpected phone call from Lysandra. I explained that she announced I would prepare dinner without asking. I told him I had refused from the very beginning. Most importantly, I explained that nobody had ever presented me with a sponsorship agreement. When I finished speaking, Daniel sounded genuinely surprised. So you're saying you never gave written or verbal approval? Correct. And you never agreed to appear in promotional content? Never. His tone became noticeably more serious. Mr. Varner, would you be willing to answer one final question? Go ahead. Did you authorize anyone to use your name in commercial advertising? No. The line went completely silent. Finally, he spoke again. Thank you. That answers everything we needed to know. Before hanging up, he added one sentence that immediately caught my attention. Our legal department will likely be reviewing today's contracts. The call lasted less than 10 minutes. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Less than an hour later, Nolan called again. His voice sounded completely different. Not panicked. Shocked. Dad. What happened now? One of the sponsors demanded to see the signed participation agreements. I immediately understood where the conversation was heading. And Lysandra brought out the paperwork. I waited. They noticed something. What? There wasn't a single signature from you. I closed my eyes. I figured. It got worse. How? The representative started comparing the contract to the promotional materials. And they realized every advertisement claimed you had personally agreed to host the dinner. I remained silent. According to Nolan, several company representatives gathered around the dining table while reviewing printed documents. One of them asked a simple question. Where is Mr. Varner's authorization? Nobody could answer. Another representative requested copies of every agreement referencing my name. Within minutes, stacks of paperwork covered the table that was supposed to hold Thanksgiving dinner. Then another discovery emerged. Every contract described the event as an authentic family gathering centered around my traditional cooking. Without me, the central feature of every campaign simply didn't exist. What did Lysandra say? I asked. She kept insisting it was a misunderstanding. Did anyone believe her? No. He sighed heavily. One representative asked why she had guaranteed your participation before obtaining your permission. I already knew there was no reasonable answer. There wasn't one, Dad. According to Nolan, the room became painfully quiet. Guests who had remained out of curiosity slowly realized they weren't witnessing a delayed holiday dinner anymore. They were watching a business deal collapse in real time. Several visitors quietly picked up their coats and left without saying goodbye. The production crew began disconnecting lights and cameras. One sponsor packed away promotional displays before the scheduled live stream had even officially ended. The perfect Thanksgiving image Lysandra had spent weeks creating disappeared piece by piece. Not because of bad weather. Not because of poor planning. Because the truth required only one unanswered question. Did Patrick Varner ever agree? The answer was no. And once that answer became impossible to ignore, every carefully constructed story surrounding the event collapsed under its own weight. As darkness settled over the harbor outside my window, I realized something important. I hadn't exposed Lysandra. She had exposed herself. All I had done was refuse to participate in a lie.